The windshield wipers were losing the fight. Derrick Sterling gripped the steering wheel of his black Escalade and leaned forward, squinting through the wall of white that had swallowed Route 95. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, one of those late-season storms that the weather channels loved to name but could never actually predict. 20 minutes ago, the road had been clear. Now it looked like the inside of a snow globe someone wouldn't stop shaking. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced at the screen. Marcus, his second-in-command. "Talk to me," Derrick said, putting it on speaker. "Boss, the supply shipment cleared the checkpoint in Albany. Everything's accounted for. Where are you?" "Still on 95. Storm's getting ugly. I'll be at the estate in 40 minutes, maybe more." "You want me to send a car out to meet you?" "I've driven through worse." He ended the call and turned the heat up another notch. The dashboard clock read 12:17 a.m. Most people with any sense were already home, tucked under blankets, watching the snow pile up against their windows. Derrick Sterling was not most people. At 34, he ran one of the most efficient operations on the entire eastern seaboard. The Sterling Syndicate controlled supply chains, logistics networks, and financial channels that stretched from New York down to the Carolinas. He'd built it from the ground up after his father's death 6 years ago, turning a mid-level organization into something that commanded genuine respect. And respect, in his world, was the only currency that never inflated. He was thinking about the week ahead, a trade negotiation with a West Coast distributor, a meeting with his accountants about quarterly expenses, when something caught his eye. A shape on the shoulder of the highway. At first, he thought it was debris, maybe a piece of a truck's cargo cover ripped loose by the wind. But then, the shape moved. It stumbled forward, one arm wrapped around itself, the other reaching out as if trying to grab the air for balance. Derrick slowed the Escalade. His headlights cut through the snow and landed on the figure, and what he saw made him ease off the gas entirely. It was a woman, walking along the edge of Route 95 in the middle of a blizzard. And she was wearing a wedding dress. The gown was torn at the hem, dragging through the snow behind her like a ruined flag. Her veil was gone. Her hair, dark, long, was plastered to her face and neck. She wasn't wearing a coat. She wasn't wearing shoes. Her bare feet left shallow prints in the snow that the wind erased almost immediately, as if the storm itself was trying to make her disappear. Derrick pulled the SUV onto the shoulder and stopped. He sat there for 3 seconds, watching her through the passenger window. She hadn't even looked up at his headlights. She was just walking, one foot in front of the other. Mechanical, like someone who had already decided that stopping meant dying. He grabbed his coat from the back seat, pushed the door open, and stepped into the wind. "Hey!" he called out. The storm swallowed his voice. He walked toward her, snow crunching under his boots. "Hey! You need to get off this road!" She stopped, turned her head slowly. Her face was pale, dangerously pale, and her lips had a bluish tint that told Derrick she'd been out here for a while. Too long. Her eyes found his, and for a moment, she just stared at him with the kind of hollow expression that belonged to someone who had run out of options about an hour ago. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was barely there, half carried away by the wind. "You're standing barefoot in a blizzard wearing a wedding dress. You are the opposite of fine." He held out his coat. "Take this, get in the car. I'll take you wherever you need to go." She looked at the coat, then at him, then at the Escalade idling behind him with its hazard lights blinking orange against the snow. Something shifted in her expression. A calculation, like she was weighing the risk of getting into a stranger's car against the certainty of freezing to death on the highway. She took the coat. As she pulled it around her shoulders, Derrick got a better look at her face, and a cold feeling that had nothing to do with the weather moved through his chest. He knew this woman. He'd seen photographs of her, 3 of them to be exact, spread across his desk just 2 weeks ago, when his intelligence team had handed him a briefing packet about his biggest rival's upcoming wedding. "You're Evelyn Vance," he said. Her hands froze on the collar of his coat. She looked up at him, and this time her eyes weren't hollow. They were sharp, afraid. "Who are you?" she asked. "Derrick Sterling." The name landed between them like a grenade. Evelyn took a half step back, and Derrick could see her running through every scenario in her head. She'd married Vance Cross less than 12 hours ago. Vance Cross, who controlled the northern trade corridors. Vance Cross, who had spent the last 2 years trying to undercut, outmaneuver, and destroy everything the Sterling Syndicate had built. And now here she was, standing in front of his primary enemy, with nowhere to run and nothing to protect her except a borrowed coat. "I'd rather take my chances with the snow," she said, and actually turned to walk away. "You'll be unconscious in 20 minutes and frozen in 40, Derrick said flatly. "Whatever happened between you and Vance tonight, dying on a highway doesn't fix it." She stopped again, didn't turn around. "He left me," she said quietly. "We were in the convoy heading to the reception. 3 SUVs. Someone opened fire on the lead vehicle. Vance's driver pulled a U-turn and took off. The other cars followed. Nobody stopped. Nobody came back." She paused. "I was in the third car. The driver panicked, skidded off the road into a ditch. I waited for an hour. Nobody came." Derrick processed that. Vance Cross, a man who called himself the king of the northern corridor, had abandoned his own bride on their wedding night because a few rounds hit his convoy. He didn't send anyone back. Didn't even make a phone call. He just ran. That told Derrick 2 things. First, Vance Cross was a coward, which he'd always suspected. Second, whatever had spooked Vance tonight was big enough to make him forget about everything else, including his new wife. That kind of panic didn't come from a random attack. That was the reaction of a man who knew exactly who was shooting and exactly why. Derrick opened the passenger door of the Escalade. Warm air spilled out into the cold. "Get in," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to leave you here." Evelyn stood there for a long moment, snow collecting on the shoulders of his coat, her bare feet slowly going numb beneath her. Then she walked to the open door and climbed inside. Derrick closed the door behind her, rounded the vehicle, and got back behind the wheel. He pulled back onto Route 95 and accelerated into the storm. Neither of them spoke for a full mile. Then Evelyn said, without looking at him, "You know this makes things complicated." Derrick almost smiled. "Lady, things were complicated before you showed up. Now, they're interesting." He pressed the gas harder. The Escalade surged forward through the white darkness, carrying the bride of his greatest enemy toward a destination she didn't know yet, and a chain of events that neither of them could possibly predict. The estate sat at the end of a private road lined with bare oak trees, their branches heavy with snow. A stone wall ran the perimeter, 12 feet high, topped with sensors that Derrick's tech team had installed 18 months ago. The iron gate opened as his Escalade approached, responding to the transponder embedded in the dashboard, and closed behind him before the taillights had even cleared the entrance. 2 guards met the vehicle at the front steps. They were dressed in dark coats, hands tucked into their pockets the way men do when they want you to wonder what they're holding. One of them, a stocky guy named Reeves, leaned toward Derrick's window as it came down. "Everything quiet?" Derrick asked. "All clear, boss. Marcus called ahead, said you were running late because of the storm." Reeves glanced past Derrick at the passenger seat. His eyebrows went up about 1/4 of an inch. You got company." "I noticed. Double the perimeter rotation tonight. Nobody comes in or out without my direct say-so. And get Rita up here. Tell her to bring clothes, shoes, and whatever else a woman needs when she's been walking through a blizzard barefoot." Reeves nodded and stepped back. Derrick parked the Escalade and killed the engine. Evelyn hadn't said much during the remainder of the drive. She'd sat with his coat pulled tight around her, staring out the window at the passing darkness, her jaw set in a way that told Derrick she was thinking hard about something she wasn't ready to share. He respected that. People who talked too much when they were scared usually said the wrong things. People who went quiet were the ones worth paying attention to. He led her inside. The estate was warm, well lit, and furnished the way old money decorates. Heavy wood, leather chairs, paintings that nobody actually looked at but everyone understood cost more than a car. Rita, the household manager, appeared within minutes carrying a stack of folded clothes and a pair of boots. "Guest room on the second floor," Derrick told her. "East wing. Make sure she has everything she needs." Rita looked at Evelyn the same way Reeves had. A quick assessment, a dozen questions forming behind the eyes, none of them asked out loud. She simply said, "Follow me, dear," and guided Evelyn up the staircase. Derrick watched them go, then walked to his study and closed the door. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat behind his desk. The room was paneled in dark oak, lined with bookshelves that held a mix of actual books and concealed monitors connected to his security network. He pulled up the feeds from the front gate, the driveway, and the perimeter wall. Snow was still falling hard, which was good. Snow meant fewer eyes on the road and slower movement for anyone trying to approach. His phone rang. Marcus again. "I heard you picked up a stray," Marcus said. There was an edge to his voice that Derrick recognized as concern, disguised as sarcasm. "Word travels fast. Reeves has a big mouth. Derrick, is it true? Is that Vance Cross's wife sitting in your guest room right now?" "She was his wife for about 6 hours before he left her on a highway in a snowstorm. I'd say the marriage has some issues. This is going to cause problems." "It already has, but leaving her out there wasn't an option. She would have died, Marcus, and a dead bride on Route 95 with any connection to my name would have caused bigger problems than a living one under my roof." Marcus went quiet for a moment. "So, what's the play?" "For now, she stays here. She's safe, she's warm, and she's not Vance's problem anymore. I want eyes on every channel, social media, police scanners, the wire. If Vance makes a move, I want to know about it before he finishes making it." "Copy that." Derrick hung up and leaned back in his chair. He swirled the whiskey but didn't drink it. His mind was doing what it always did when a new variable entered his equation. Running scenarios, calculating angles, looking for the play that nobody else could see. Bringing Evelyn here was a risk, he knew that. But Derrick Sterling had built his entire operation on the principle that calculated risks were the only ones worth taking. And something about tonight, the timing, the convoy attack, the fact that Vance had run without looking back, told him that Evelyn Vance was more than just an abandoned bride. She was a loose thread, and in his experience, loose threads either unraveled everything or tied something new together. Upstairs, Evelyn locked the guest room door and leaned her back against it. She stood there for a full minute, breathing slowly, letting her heart rate come down from the elevated hum it had been running at since the convoy. The room was nicer than she'd expected. A queen bed with a thick comforter, a bathroom with a heated floor, clean towels, a robe hanging on the back of the door. Rita had left the clothes on the bed, a simple sweater, dark pants, wool socks, and the boots. Evelyn peeled off the ruined wedding dress and let it fall to the floor in a heap of torn silk and beaded lace. She looked at it for a moment. $12,000. Vance had insisted on the designer, the custom fitting, the hand-sewn details. He'd wanted her to look like a trophy because that's exactly what she was supposed to be. A trophy wife for a man who collected power the way other people collected watches. She stepped over the dress and walked to the bathroom. Under the harsh light, she examined her reflection. Her feet were raw and red, the skin cracked in places from the cold pavement and ice. Her mascara had run in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked wrecked. She looked like someone who had just survived something terrible. Good. That was exactly what she needed everyone to believe. Evelyn reached behind her neck and unclasped the delicate pendant she'd worn throughout the ceremony. It was a small silver oval, elegant enough to pass as a piece of bridal jewelry. She pressed her thumbnail into a barely visible seam along the edge, and the pendant split open. Inside, nestled in a custom foam cradle, sat a microdrive no bigger than a fingernail. She held it up to the light and turned it slowly between her fingers. Everything was still there. Months of work, hundreds of hours of carefully copied files, transaction logs, account numbers, and routing codes, all siphoned from Vance Cross's private financial network during the 8 months she'd spent as his fiancée. Evelyn closed the pendant, reclasped it around her neck, and tucked it beneath the collar of the sweater Rita had left for her. Then, she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of relief before her mind shifted back to the problem in front of her. She was inside the estate of Derrick Sterling, the man Vance feared more than anyone else in the Eastern Corridor. She'd traded one lion's den for another, and the data around her neck was the only thing keeping her valuable enough to stay alive in either one. She needed to access the drive soon. The encryption had a time-sensitive layer, a rolling key that would lock permanently if she didn't run the first decryption pass within 72 hours of extraction. She had pulled the files during the wedding reception, right before the convoy departed. That gave her roughly 60 hours. 60 hours to find the right hardware, crack the encryption, and get the contents to someone who could actually use them. And she had to do all of that while sitting inside the home of a man who had every reason to use her as a bargaining chip against her so-called husband. Evelyn lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling the old frames. She closed her eyes, but her mind kept working, turning over plans and backup plans the way a mechanic turns a wrench. Downstairs, Derrick's phone lit up with an alert from his media monitoring team. He opened the message and read it twice. Vance Cross had gone public. He'd contacted every major outlet in the region with a single, devastating claim: that the Sterling syndicate had orchestrated an armed ambush on his wedding convoy and kidnapped his bride. He was calling it an act of war, and he was demanding that every allied organization in the corridor choose a side. Derrick set the phone down and finally took a sip of his whiskey. The game had just changed. Evelyn wasn't just a guest anymore. She was evidence, leverage, and a target, all wrapped in one. And keeping her alive just became the most important thing Derrick Sterling had to do this week. Evelyn waited until the house went still. It was just past 2 in the afternoon, but the estate had a rhythm she'd already picked up on. The guards rotated shifts at noon and midnight. Rita handled the kitchen and household tasks until early afternoon, then retreated to her quarters on the ground floor. Marcus had come and gone twice since morning, each visit lasting exactly 20 minutes. Derrick had been locked in his study since breakfast, taking calls behind a closed door. The window was small, but it was there. She moved down the second-floor hallway in the wool socks Rita had provided, her footsteps silent on the hardwood. The study was on the first floor, east side, behind a set of double doors with brass handles. But that wasn't where she was headed. During her walk to breakfast that morning, she'd spotted something through a half-open door at the far end of the corridor. A secondary office, smaller than the study, with a desktop terminal and what looked like a direct fiber-optic line running along the baseboard. The kind of connection that didn't route through standard networks. The kind that could handle the decryption handshake her microdrive required without leaving a traceable signature. She reached the door. It was unlocked. She slipped inside and closed it behind her. The room was sparse. A desk, the terminal, 2 monitors, and a stack of external hard drives lined up on a metal shelf. The fiber line ran from a wall port into the back of the terminal. Evelyn sat down, pulled the pendant from beneath her sweater, and opened it. She placed the microdrive on the desk beside the keyboard and powered on the terminal. The screen loaded a custom operating system. No icons, no desktop wallpaper, just a command line interface with a blinking cursor. Military grade, or close to it. Derrick Sterling took his digital security seriously. Evelyn's fingers moved quickly. She needed to establish a handshake between the microdrive and a remote authentication server she'd set up months ago under a false identity. The server would send back the first decryption key, which would unlock the outer shell of the files. The deeper layers would require dedicated hardware, an air-gapped machine with enough processing power to crack the rolling encryption without triggering the self-destruct protocol Vance had built into his system. She plugged the microdrive into a side port and began typing commands. 45 seconds in, the door opened behind her. "Hands off the keyboard. Now." The voice was flat and calm in the way that dangerous people are calm. Evelyn lifted her hands slowly and turned around. Carter stood in the doorway. Derrick's lead enforcer was a tall man in his mid-40s with a shaved head and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from concrete. He wore a shoulder holster over a dark shirt, and his eyes were locked on Evelyn with the focus of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Stand up," he said. "I can explain." "You can explain to the boss. Move." He walked her downstairs to the study. 2 knocks on the door, then Carter pushed it open and guided Evelyn inside. Derrick was standing by the window, phone in hand, mid-conversation. He took one look at Carter's expression and ended the call. "Found her on your secondary terminal," Carter said. "She had a device plugged into the fiber port. This." He held up the microdrive between his thumb and forefinger. Derrick looked at the drive, then at Evelyn. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. The same look a chess player gets when an opponent makes a move that wasn't in any of the predicted sequences. "Leave it on the desk," Derrick told Carter, "and close the door on your way out." Carter hesitated. He clearly wanted to stay, wanted to be part of whatever was about to unfold, but Derrick's instructions weren't the kind that came with a discussion option. Carter placed the microdrive on the desk and left, pulling the door shut behind him. Silence filled the room. Derrick picked up the microdrive and examined it. "This is a high-capacity encrypted storage device, custom-built, not the kind of thing a bride carries in her jewelry for sentimental reasons." He set it back down and looked at her. "So who are you, Evelyn? And I mean, who are you really? Because the woman in the briefing packet my team gave me 2 weeks ago was a former real estate consultant from Connecticut who met Vance Cross at a charity auction. Somehow, I don't think that story holds up anymore." Evelyn stood in front of his desk with her arms at her sides. She could feel the moment balancing on a razor's edge. Lie, and Derrick would hand her back to Vance within the hour. Tell the truth, and she was putting her life in the hands of a man she'd known for less than 18 hours. She chose the truth, partly because she was running out of time, and partly because something in the way Derrick had pulled over on that highway told her he operated on a code that Vance Cross had never understood. "My real name is Evelyn Marsh," she said. "Vance doesn't know that. Nobody in his organization does. I'm a forensic financial analyst, independent. I've spent the last 3 years tracking large-scale fraud networks across the Eastern Corridor, building cases that I sell to oversight bodies and private security firms." Derrick leaned against the edge of his desk and folded his arms. "Go on." 8 months ago, I identified Vance Cross as the center of a network moving millions through layered shell companies. Fake invoices, phantom shipments, recycled routing numbers. He's been skimming from shared trade routes, the ones that every organization in the corridor depends on. I'm talking about the neutral channels that your syndicate uses too. That got his attention. Derrick's jaw tightened slightly. "You're saying Vance has been stealing from the shared lines?" "I'm saying he's been doing it for at least 2 years. And the amount is significant enough to collapse the trust structure that holds the entire corridor together. But I couldn't prove it from the outside. His encryption is layered, compartmentalized, and time-locked. The only way to get the raw data was to get inside his personal network. So, I created Evelyn Vance. I built a cover, got close to him, and spent 8 months copying every transaction record I could access." She pointed at the microdrive on the desk. "That drive contains everything. Account numbers, routing codes, shell company registrations, payment schedules, all of it. But the files are encrypted with a rolling key system that Vance designed himself. The outer layer I can crack with a remote handshake. That's what I was doing on your terminal. The deeper layers need dedicated hardware, an air-gapped decryption server with enough processing power to run the key sequence before the self-destruct timer wipes the drive. And you don't have that hardware. I was supposed to acquire it after the wedding. I had a contact in Manhattan lined up for a purchase 3 days from now. The convoy attack threw everything off schedule. Derrick was quiet for a long moment. He picked up the microdrive again and held it between 2 fingers, turning it slowly the way someone examines a key before deciding which door it opens.
"If what you're saying is true," he said, "this drive doesn't just take down Vance. It exposes everyone he's been working with, every partner, every account, every handshake deal made in the last 2 years." "That's correct. And you were planning to sell this information?" Evelyn met his eyes without flinching. "I was planning to deliver it to people who can act on it. What happens after that depends on who those people are." Derrick set the drive down and walked to the window. The snow had stopped, but the sky was still a heavy grey, pressing down on the bare trees like a lid. He stood there for 10 seconds, thinking. Then he turned back to her.
"Your Manhattan contact is burned. If Vance knows the drive is missing, and based on the fact that he's screaming about a kidnapping to anyone who'll listen, he absolutely knows, then every tech dealer in the city is being watched. You need hardware that can't be traced, purchased somewhere outside his reach." "Yes. I know a broker in Philadelphia. High-end equipment, no questions asked, no digital trail." Evelyn studied him. "Why would you help me?" Derrick almost laughed. "Because if Vance has been skimming from the shared routes, he's been stealing from me too. And I take that personally." He handed the microdrive back to her. She looked down at it in his open palm, surprised. She'd expected him to keep it, to hold it as leverage, the way Vance would have. She took it and closed her fingers around it.
"We leave for Philadelphia as soon as the road's clear," Derrick said. "But first, you're going to walk me through every layer of that encryption so I know exactly what we're dealing with. No more secrets, no more locked doors. From this point forward, we're working together, or we're not working at all. Your call." Evelyn slipped the drive back into the pendant and clasped it around her neck. "Together," she said. Carter made the call at 6 a.m. from the bathroom of his quarters on the estate's ground floor. He ran the faucet to cover his voice, sat on the edge of the tub, and dialed a number he'd memorized 3 months ago, but never used until now. It rang twice. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end was clipped, impatient, and carried the faint accent of someone who'd grown up in the Bronx, but spent years trying to sand it away. "It's Carter. I work for Sterling." A pause. "I know who you are. Why are you calling this line?" "Because I have something your boss wants. The woman, Evelyn. She's here. Westchester Estate, East Wing, 2nd floor. And she's carrying a drive with enough data on it to bury Vance Cross 6 feet under his own operation." The pause stretched longer this time. Carter could hear breathing, the faint click of a lighter, the inhale of a cigarette. "What do you want?" the voice asked. "A truce. Sterling's been expanding south for the last year, and it's squeezing my territory. I've been running the enforcement side of this syndicate for 9 years, and my cut hasn't moved in 4. Derrick treats me like furniture. I want a guaranteed corridor, my own piece of the map. I deliver the woman and the drive. Vance gives me the West Brooklyn district. Clean, permanent, no interference." That's a big ask. It's a big delivery. You want her or not? Another drag on the cigarette. "We'll need a location that isn't the Westchester Estate. Sterling's security there is too tight. Can you move her?" Carter had already thought about this. Derrick's planning to relocate tomorrow. He thinks the estate might be compromised because of the media attention Vance stirred up. I'll suggest the Brooklyn safe house, the warehouse on Flushing Avenue. It's a secondary location, lighter security, easier to approach. "When?" "Tomorrow, midday. I'll make sure the perimeter team is thin. You bring a small crew, grab her, and get out. No firefight, no mess. Derrick won't even know what happened until it's too late. I'll pass it up the chain. If Vance approves, we move." Carter ended the call, wiped the phone's history, and turned off the faucet. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long moment. His reflection stared back. Same hard face, same flat eyes. 9 years he'd given to Derrick Sterling. 9 years of standing in doorways, breaking down doors, solving problems that nobody else wanted to touch. And what did he have to show for it? A room on the ground floor and a salary that hadn't changed since the previous administration. Derrick was smart. Carter had never denied that. But smart men had a weakness. They trusted their own judgment so completely that they never considered the possibility that the people closest to them had already stopped being loyal. The next morning, Derrick gathered his core team in the study. Marcus stood by the door. Carter leaned against the bookshelf with his arms crossed. 2 other operatives, Reeves and a quiet woman named Dana who handled logistics, sat in chairs facing the desk. "We're moving," Derrick said. "Vance's kidnapping story is picking up traction, and I don't want this estate connected to Evelyn in any way. We relocate today." "Where to?" Marcus asked. Carter spoke up before anyone else could. "The Flushing Avenue warehouse. It's off the grid, minimal footprint. We used it last year during the port dispute and nobody flagged it then." Derrick considered this. "It's light on security." "That's the point," Carter said. "A place that looks like nothing draws less attention than a fortified estate in Westchester. We keep a small team, stay quiet, and move again in 48 hours toward wherever we need to be for the hardware purchase." Marcus looked uneasy. "I'd rather go straight to Pennsylvania, skip the pit stop." "The roads through Jersey are a mess from the storm," Carter countered. "Half the highways are still being cleared. Brooklyn gives us a staging point. We rest, regroup, and head west tomorrow night when the routes are open." Derrick looked between the 2 men. Carter's logic was clean, practical, exactly the kind of operational thinking that had made him valuable for nearly a decade. "Brooklyn," Derrick said, "but we go heavy on communication gear. I want real-time feeds from every camera within a 3-block radius of that warehouse. Marcus, set it up. We leave in 2 hours." They arrived at the Flushing Avenue warehouse just before noon. The building was a squat, rectangular structure wedged between a shuttered textile factory and a parking lot filled with rusted shipping containers. The interior had been converted into a functional space, cots, a generator, basic kitchen setup, and a communications hub that Marcus began assembling the moment they walked through the door. Evelyn kept to herself, sitting at a metal table near the back wall with a laptop Derrick had provided. She was mapping out the encryption layers of the microdrive, building a diagram of the key sequences she'd need to run once they acquired the decryption server. Her focus was absolute, her pen moving steadily across a notebook as she cross-referenced file structures from memory. Carter watched her from across the room. He checked his watch. The handoff was supposed to happen at 1 o'clock. Vance's team would approach from the east side, through the parking lot. Carter had already propped open the emergency exit on that wall, citing ventilation. Nobody had questioned it. At 12:45, Derrick's phone buzzed. He read the message, and his expression changed. "Marcus," he said, his voice dropping low. "Pull up the eastern perimeter feed. Now." Marcus tapped a few keys on his laptop, the screen filled with a grainy camera view of the parking lot behind the building. 3 vehicles were parked between the shipping containers, black sedans, engines running, and men were stepping out of them, 6, 7, 8, spreading into a formation that anyone with tactical experience would recognize instantly. Derrick turned and looked at Carter. The look lasted exactly 2 seconds, but it contained an entire conversation. Carter's face gave away nothing, but his hand drifted a 1/4 inch toward his belt, and that was enough. "Dana," Derrick said calmly, "take Evelyn and go to the freight access point in the basement. There's a tunnel that connects to the old subway maintenance corridor 2 blocks north. Move." Dana didn't ask questions. She grabbed Evelyn by the arm, pulled her away from the table, and headed for the stairs. Evelyn snatched her notebook and the pendant in one fluid motion, tucking both close to her body as she followed. Derrick looked at Carter one more time. 9 years, he said quietly, and this is how you spend it. Carter's jaw worked, but no words came out. Whatever justification he'd rehearsed in his bathroom mirror yesterday morning had evaporated under the weight of Derrick's stare. "Marcus, lock the building down. Nobody leaves through the front." Derrick turned his back on Carter and headed for the basement stairs. Behind him, Marcus moved with practiced efficiency, sealing the main entrance and activating the security shutters on the ground floor windows. The freight tunnel was dark, narrow, and smelled like decades of stale water and industrial grease. Derrick caught up with Dana and Evelyn 100 yards in. Emergency lighting cast weak yellow pools every 30 feet, just enough to see the path ahead. "How did you know?" Evelyn asked as they moved. "I put a passive monitor on every phone in the building 6 months ago. Carter's bathroom call yesterday morning showed up as a 7-minute outgoing connection to a number registered under one of Vance's front companies." Derrick's voice was even, controlled, but there was something underneath it, a rawness that he kept buried deep. "I didn't want to believe it, so I let today play out to see if he'd actually go through with it." That's a dangerous way to confirm a suspicion. It's the only way that doesn't leave room for doubt. They emerged from the tunnel into a maintenance corridor beneath an old subway platform. Dana had a car waiting on the street above, a gray sedan, unremarkable, already running. They climbed in, and Dana pulled away from the curb without turning on the headlights until they were 2 blocks clear. Derrick sat in the back seat beside Evelyn. He pulled out his phone and sent a single message to Marcus. "Clean house. Carter is done." Then he powered the phone off, leaned his head back against the seat, and closed his eyes. When he opened them a moment later, his expression had reset. The rawness was gone, locked away somewhere behind the operational mask he wore like a second skin. "Change of plan," he said. "We're not stopping again until we're out of New York, Pennsylvania. Tonight." Evelyn nodded and said nothing. She understood something about Derrick Sterling in that moment that she hadn't fully grasped before. This man didn't just run an organization, he carried it. Every betrayal, every broken trust, every decision that cut close to the bone, he absorbed it all and kept moving forward, because stopping was something he'd never learned how to do. The sedan merged onto the highway, heading west, leaving Brooklyn and everything that had gone wrong there shrinking in the rearview mirror. The sedan crossed into Pennsylvania just after midnight. Dana drove with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who understood that the fastest way to attract attention on a dark highway was to look like you were running from something. She kept the speedometer at exactly 62, stayed in the right lane, and checked the mirrors every 30 seconds with the discipline of a woman who had been doing this kind of work long enough to make it look routine. Evelyn sat in the back seat with the laptop open on her knees. The screen's blue glow was the only light in the car besides the dashboard instruments. She'd been quiet for the first hour of the drive, organizing her thoughts, replaying the events in Brooklyn. But once they cleared the New Jersey state line, she opened the laptop and connected to a satellite uplink that Derrick handed her from a case in the trunk. "This connection is clean?" she asked. "Routed through 3 commercial satellites and a private relay in Ontario," Derrick said from the seat beside her. "Even if someone intercepts the signal, all they'll see is encrypted weather data from a Canadian agriculture company." Evelyn allowed herself a small nod of approval. She typed a series of commands into a terminal window, accessing a monitoring tool she'd built during her months inside Vance's organization. The tool was passive. It didn't touch Vance's servers directly. Instead, it tracked the external signatures of his network activity, access logs, server response times, bandwidth spikes. Tiny digital footprints that, when read together, painted a picture of what was happening inside his system without ever knocking on the front door. What she saw confirmed her fears. "He's locked everything down," she said. "Primary servers, backup arrays, even the secondary communication channels. He changed the access protocols across the board sometime in the last 12 hours. "Meaning what?" "Meaning he knows the drive is missing. He's not just angry about the wedding or the kidnapping story. He's in full containment mode. Every door into his system is shut. Every key has been rotated. He's trying to figure out exactly what I took and how deep I got." Derrick processed that. Can he trace what's on the drive from his end? Figure out which files you copied?
Eventually, yes. The files I pulled leave ghost markers in the access logs. It'll take his tech team time to find them, maybe a week, maybe less, but once they do, they'll know exactly which accounts and records I have. And then he'll know how much trouble he's really in.
Dana glanced in the rearview mirror.
So, we're on a clock.
We've been on a clock since the wedding,
Evelyn said. It just got shorter.
Derrick pulled out a second phone, a burner he'd taken from the emergency kit in the sedan's glove compartment, and dialed. The call connected after 4 rings.
Marcus, talk to me.
Marcus sounded tired but focused.
Carter's gone. He cleared out before we could secure him, took one of the backup vehicles and headed north. I've got people watching the obvious routes, but if he runs to Vance, he'll be across the line before we can catch him.
Let him go, Derrick said. Carter already gave Vance everything he knows about our operations. Chasing him doesn't change that. What matters now is making sure everything Carter knew becomes irrelevant.
I'm already on it. I've rotated all communication codes, changed the safe house access sequences, and pulled our people out of every location Carter had clearance to visit. The Westchester estate is being shut down as a primary base. I'm moving operations to the backup facility in Newark.
Good. I need one more thing. The inner circle. Everyone who's been in a room with me in the last 6 months. I want them vetted again. Full background, financial checks,
Communication logs.
If anyone else has been talking to the wrong people, I want to know before they get the chance to do what Carter did.
That's going to ruffle some feathers, Derrick.
Feathers grow back. Trust doesn't. Get it done. He ended the call and sat in the dark, watching the highway markers slip past the window. Pennsylvania was flat here, or at least it felt that way in the darkness. Just long stretches of road bordered by black tree lines and the occasional glow of a distant farmhouse.
You're reorganizing your entire operation from the back seat of a car,
Evelyn said. I've run this syndicate from worse places.
That wasn't a criticism. I'm just trying to understand how you think.
Derrick turned his head slightly to look at her. I think in terms of what I can control and what I can't. Carter's betrayal, I can't undo that. The information he gave Vance, I can't take it back. So I make it worthless. I change everything he knew, restructure every protocol he touched, and build a new framework that doesn't include him. By the time Vance tries to use Carter's intel, it'll be like reading a map to a city that doesn't exist anymore. Evelyn closed the laptop and leaned back.
Vance doesn't think that way. When something goes wrong,
he gets louder. He throws resources at the problem until it either goes away or everyone around him is too afraid to mention it. That's why his organization looks strong from the outside, but has fractures running through the foundation. Is that the financial analyst talking, or the woman who was engaged to him for 8 months? She was quiet for a beat. Both. You can't spend that much time inside someone's life without understanding how they operate. Vance is brilliant with numbers, with structures, with building systems that move money in ways that are almost impossible to trace. But he treats people like components, replaceable parts. When a part fails, he doesn't ask why. He just finds a new one. And that's his weakness. That's his biggest weakness. The people around him stay because of fear or money. Take away either one, and they'll scatter. The data on that drive takes away the money. Once his partners see where their funds have actually been going, the fear won't be enough to keep them in line. Dana took an exit ramp and merged onto a smaller highway heading northwest. The terrain was changing, gentle hills rising on either side, the tree line thickening. They were moving into the interior of the state, away from the major corridors and into the kind of rural landscape where a person could disappear for weeks without trying very hard.
The facility we're heading to, Evelyn said. What is it?
A property I own under a holding company that has no connection to the Sterling name. It's in the mountains, about 40 minutes outside of Scranton. I use it for situations that require distance and quiet.
How often do those situations come up?
More often than I'd like. Dana drove on. The highway narrowed to 2 lanes, and the streetlights disappeared entirely. Out here, the darkness was complete. No city glow on the horizon, no passing headlights, just the sedan's beams cutting a tunnel through the black. Derrick watched the road ahead and let his mind settle into the rhythm of the drive. He thought about Carter, and then he made himself stop thinking about Carter because there was nothing productive left in that direction. The man had made his choice, and Derrick had made his. What mattered now was forward. The broker in Philadelphia, the decryption hardware, the data on that drive, and what it could do once it was unlocked. He thought about Evelyn. 8 months undercover inside the personal life of one of the most dangerous men on the eastern seaboard, living in his home, sitting across from him at dinner, building a cover so thorough that even Vance's own security team never flagged her. That took a particular kind of discipline, the kind that most people didn't have and couldn't fake. She was useful, that was certain. But Derrick had learned a long time ago that useful people were also the most dangerous, because their value made you want to trust them faster than you should. He'd trust her at the speed the situation required, and he'd verify everything along the way. The sedan climbed a long hill, crested it, and began the descent into a valley where the darkness seemed to pool like water. Somewhere ahead, the mountains were waiting, and somewhere behind them, Vance Cross was burning through every resource he had, trying to find the woman sitting 3 feet to Derrick's left. The clock was ticking for both sides now. Philadelphia announced itself gradually. First, the distant haze of light pollution, bleeding into the evening sky. Then the thickening traffic on the interstate. Then the skyline itself, rising beyond the river, like a row of illuminated pillars. Derrick had driven the last stretch himself, giving Dana a break in the back seat, where she'd fallen asleep within minutes, her coat folded under her head like a pillow. Evelyn sat up front now, watching the city approach through the windshield. She'd changed into the fresh clothes they'd picked up at a roadside store in the Poconos that morning, a dark jacket, jeans, a plain gray shirt. She looked like any other woman heading into the city for a late dinner. The pendant still hung around her neck, tucked beneath her collar, invisible. "The broker," she said. "Tell me about him." "His name is Oren. He operates out of a place in Chinatown. Looks like a regular electronics repair shop from the street. Phones, laptops, screen replacements. But the back room is where the real inventory lives. Custom-built servers, air-gapped systems, hardware that's been stripped of every manufacturer's tracking signature. He supplies about a dozen organizations on the East Coast, and his reputation depends on discretion." "Can he be trusted?" "He can be trusted to protect his business. Oren doesn't take sides. He sells to whoever walks through his door, and he keeps no records of the transaction. The moment the hardware leaves his shop, it's like the sale never happened. That's his model, and it's kept him alive in a market where most of his competitors have either been arrested or disappeared." "Does Vance know about him?" Derrick hesitated. "Oren sells to everyone. That includes Vance's people. But Oren's shop isn't monitored by any one client. It's neutral ground. Neutral ground that Vance's team could be watching. It's possible. That's why we're not parking out front and walking through the main entrance. Oren has a secondary access point through the building next door, a fire escape that connects through a shared wall on the 3rd floor. I called ahead. He's expecting us at 8. They reached the city at 7:15. Derrick navigated through the downtown grid with the familiarity of someone who'd spent time here before, turning off the main avenues into the narrower streets of Chinatown. The neighborhood was alive despite the cold. Restaurant signs glowing in red and gold, steam rising from kitchen vents, clusters of people moving between shops that stayed open long past the hour when most of the city had shut down. He parked the sedan on a side street 2 blocks from Oren's shop. Dana stayed with the car, engine running, positioned for a fast exit if the situation required one. Derrick and Evelyn walked the rest of the way on foot, keeping their pace casual, blending into the foot traffic. The building next to Oren's shop was a 3-story walk-up with a laundromat on the ground floor. The fire escape hung on the alley side, a zigzag of rusted metal stairs that groaned under their weight as they climbed. On the 3rd floor, a window had been left unlocked.
Derrick pushed it open, and they stepped through into a narrow hallway that smelled like solder and old carpet. Oren met them at the end of the hall. He was a short man in his 60s, with thick glasses and nicotine-stained fingers. He wore a wool vest over a flannel shirt, and his expression carried the permanent skepticism of someone who'd spent decades dealing with people who lied for a living. "Sterling," he said, shaking Derrick's hand without enthusiasm. "You said you needed an air-gapped unit with high processing capacity. I've got two options. Come look." He led them into the back room. It was larger than Evelyn had expected. Rows of metal shelving stacked with components, partially assembled machines, coils of cable, and racks of hard drives still in their anti-static bags. Oren walked them to a workbench at the far end, where two servers sat side by side. One was compact, about the size of a briefcase. The other was larger, rack-mounted, with dual processing units visible through an open panel. Evelyn examined both. She ran her fingers along the casing of the smaller unit, checked the processor specifications on a label affixed to the motherboard, and then moved to the larger one. She opened the panel wider, traced the wiring, and pulled a small diagnostic tool from her jacket pocket, something she'd been carrying since her days building financial tracking systems for private firms. "This one," she said, pointing to the larger server. "The smaller unit doesn't have enough parallel processing threads to handle the rolling key sequence. The encryption will time out before it finishes the cycle. I need the dual-core rack." Oren named a price. Derrick didn't negotiate. He reached into the lining of his jacket and produced a thick envelope. Oren counted it twice, nodded, and began disconnecting the server from the bench. That's when Evelyn noticed the camera. It was small, barely the size of a thumbnail, mounted on the edge of a shelf near the ceiling, angled toward the workbench. It could have been part of Oren's own security system, but the tiny blue LED on its side was pulsing in a pattern she recognized. 3 short flashes, 1 long, a wireless transmission indicator. That camera was sending a live feed somewhere outside this building. "Derrick," she said quietly, "we need to leave. Now." He followed her eyes to the camera. His expression didn't change, but his body shifted, weight moving to the balls of his feet, shoulders squaring, the subtle recalibration of a man preparing to move fast. "Oren," Derrick said, "that camera on the shelf, is it yours?" Oren looked up, squinted at the device, and his face went pale. "That's not mine. That wasn't there yesterday." Derrick grabbed the server off the bench. It was heavy, maybe 40 pounds, but he lifted it with one arm and tucked it against his side. "We're going out the way we came in. Move." They were halfway down the 3rd-floor hallway when Derrick's phone buzzed. Dana, from the car. "2 vehicles just pulled up at the end of the alley. 4 men getting out. They're heading for the fire escape." Derrick rerouted instantly. Instead of the fire escape, he pushed through a door marked Roof Access and led Evelyn up a narrow staircase to the building's rooftop. The cold hit them immediately, the wind sharper up here, cutting across the flat tar surface. The building shared a wall with a multi-story parking garage to the north. The gap between them was maybe 4 feet. Derrick stepped back, measured the distance, and jumped across with the server still clamped under his arm. He landed on the concrete ledge of the garage's top level and turned back. "Come on!" Evelyn jumped. He caught her arm and pulled her onto solid ground. They descended through the parking garage at a controlled run. Down one ramp, across a level, down another ramp. The structure was half empty at this hour, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Derrick moved with purpose, heading for the ground-level exit on the opposite side of the building from the alley. His phone buzzed again. "Dana, I'm circling the block, west entrance of the garage. 30 seconds. They reached the ground floor just as the grey sedan appeared at the exit ramp. Dana had the back door open before the car fully stopped. Derrick loaded the server onto the back seat, and Evelyn climbed in after it. Derrick took the front passenger seat, and Dana accelerated onto the street, merging smoothly into the evening traffic of Chinatown. In the side mirror, Derrick saw 2 men emerge from the parking garage entrance, scanning the street. One of them was holding a phone to his ear, talking rapidly. They were too late. "Oren's network has been compromised," Evelyn said from the back seat, her breathing still elevated from the sprint. "Vance's people planted that camera recently. They've probably been monitoring every client who walks through that shop. Which means Vance knows we were there. He knows we were there, and he knows we acquired the hardware. He'll assume the decryption is next. He's going to throw everything he has at finding us before I can crack that drive." Derrick looked at Dana. "How fast can you get us to the Poconos?" 3 hours if I push it. 2.5 if you don't mind me bending a few traffic laws." "Bend them." Dana pressed the accelerator, and the sedan shot forward through a yellow light, leaving Philadelphia's glow behind as they merged onto the westbound highway. The server sat on the back seat beside Evelyn, like a metal suitcase full of answers that nobody had been able to ask until now. 60 hours had shrunk to less than 30. But they had the hardware. And somewhere in those encrypted files, Vance Cross's entire empire was waiting to be pulled apart at the seams. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that hadn't been plowed since the last snowfall. Dana parked the sedan behind a stand of pine trees where it couldn't be seen from the main trail, and the three of them carried the server inside through a side door that Derrick unlocked with a physical key. No electronic locks, no keypads, nothing that could be accessed remotely. The place was simple. Log walls, a stone fireplace, a kitchen with enough canned supplies to last a week. The furniture was old but solid. A wooden table, 4 chairs, a couch with a wool blanket draped over the arm. No television, no landline. The only concession to the modern world was a diesel generator housed in a shed out back, which Derrick started while Evelyn cleared the kitchen table and began setting up the server. She worked with the kind of focus that made the room around her disappear. Cables were connected, power lines routed through a surge protector she'd insisted they buy at a gas station on the way up. The server hummed to life, its dual processors spinning with a low vibration that she could feel through the table's surface. Derrick stood by the window with a mug of coffee, watching the tree line. The mountain was quiet. No traffic sounds, no distant sirens, nothing but wind moving through pine branches and the occasional crack of a frozen limb giving way under the weight of old snow. Dana had taken up a position near the front door with a clear sight line down the dirt road. She sat in a chair with a thermos and a patience that suggested she could remain exactly like that for the next 12 hours without complaint. "Walk me through what's about to happen," Derrick said. Evelyn was connecting the microdrive to the server through an adapter she'd assembled from parts Oren had thrown into the purchase as extras. "The encryption on this drive has 4 layers. Think of it like 4 locked doors, each with a different type of key. The first layer is a standard cryptographic shell. I cracked that during the partial handshake on your terminal back at the estate. The second layer uses a rotating key algorithm. The server generates potential key combinations at high speed and tests them against the lock until one fits. That's the part that takes processing power." "And the other 2 layers?" "The third is a biometric hash tied to Vance's personal access credentials. I cloned his fingerprint signature from a glass he used during our engagement party. It's stored on the drive itself as a secondary authentication. The 4th layer is the time lock, a countdown that started when I extracted the files. If the decryption sequence isn't completed before the timer expires, the entire drive wipes itself. Permanently." "How much time do we have?" Evelyn checked a timestamp on the server's display. 26 hours and 14 minutes. "Is that enough?" "If the hardware performs the way it should, the rolling key sequence will take between 8 and 12 hours to complete. After that, the biometric layer is fast, maybe 30 minutes. So yes, it's enough, assuming nothing goes wrong." Derrick took a sip of his coffee. "In my experience, that's a large assumption." Evelyn almost smiled. "Almost." "Then let's make sure nothing goes wrong." She initiated the decryption sequence at 11 p.m. The server's fans increased their speed, and the display filled with scrolling lines of code, thousands of key combinations being generated, tested, and discarded every second. A progress bar appeared at the bottom of the screen, barely visible, creeping forward at a pace that made watching it feel like staring at a clock. The first 3 hours passed in near silence. Derrick alternated between the window and the table, reading the server's output over Evelyn's shoulder without asking questions he could answer himself by observation. The progress bar reached 7%, then 12, then 18. Around 2 in the morning, Evelyn leaned back in her chair and stretched her neck. The key space is narrowing. The algorithm is eliminating dead-end combinations faster than I projected. We might finish the second layer in under 10 hours. Good. You should sleep. I'll sleep when the drive is decrypted. You've been running on fumes since I picked you up on that highway. If something goes wrong in hour 9, I need you sharp enough to fix it, not staring at the screen with your eyes half closed. She looked at him for a moment, evaluating, the way she always seemed to be evaluating. Then she stood up. Wake me if the progress stalls, or if the error log shows anything unusual, anything at all. I know how to read an error log. She raised an eyebrow. You know how to read a financial decryption error log? I know how to read the word error and come get you. That time she did smile. Brief, tired, but genuine. She walked to the couch, pulled the wool blanket over herself, and was asleep within minutes. Derrick sat down in front of the server and watched the code scroll. He didn't understand most of it. The technical details were Evelyn's domain, but he understood progress, and the numbers were moving in the right direction. 23%, 27, 31. Dana came inside around 4 a.m., stamping snow off her boots. Road's still clear, no movement on the trail for the last 5 hours. If anyone's looking for us up here, they haven't found the right mountain yet. Keep watching. Vance knows we have the hardware. He'll be working every contact he has to figure out where we went. Dana nodded and went back outside. Derrick refilled his coffee and returned to his post. The hours crawled. Dawn came slowly to the Poconos, a gradual lightening of the sky from black to gray to a pale, washed-out blue. The sun never fully appeared, blocked by a thick layer of clouds that sat on the mountaintops like a ceiling. The temperature outside dropped further, and frost crept across the cabin windows in feathered patterns. By 8 a.m., the progress bar read 62%. By noon, it hit 81. Evelyn woke on her own around 1 in the afternoon, checked the display, and sat back down at the table without a word. Her eyes tracked the scrolling data with the fluency of someone reading a novel in their native language. At 6 p.m., the second layer cracked. The server chimed, a single, clean tone, and the screen changed. The rolling key sequence terminated, and a new prompt appeared requesting biometric authentication. Evelyn inserted a small USB device containing the cloned fingerprint hash and entered a command string. 32 minutes later, the third layer opened. The time lock was still counting down. 9 hours and 43 minutes remained. More than enough. The fourth layer dissolved on its own once the first 3 were cleared. It was a failsafe, designed to wipe the drive only if the other layers remained intact past the deadline. With those layers gone, the timer became irrelevant. The screen filled with files, hundreds of them. Spreadsheets, transaction logs, account registrations, wire transfer confirmations, corporate filings for shell companies in 6 different jurisdictions. Evelyn opened them one by one, scanning the contents with the speed of someone who already knew what she was looking for, but needed to confirm it was all there. It was all there. "This is everything," she said quietly. "Every dollar Vance moved through the shared trade routes for the last 27 months. Every skim, every diversion, every phantom invoice. He's been pulling between 3 and 5% off every transaction that passes through the corridor's neutral channels. It doesn't sound like much until you see the volume." "How much total?" Evelyn pulled up a summary sheet she'd built from the raw data. The number at the bottom had 8 digits. Derrick set down his coffee mug. "He's been stealing that much from the shared lines. From everyone who uses them. That includes your syndicate, the southern distributors, the coastal operators, every organization that relies on those channels for clean transactions. He's been taxing the entire corridor without anyone knowing." Derrick stared at the screen. The number sat there, glowing softly, and he understood with complete clarity what it represented. This wasn't just evidence of theft.
This was proof that Vance Cross had violated the one rule that held the entire Eastern Corridor together: the neutrality of the shared routes. Every organization depended on those channels being untouched. It was the foundation of cooperation, the single agreement that kept a dozen competing groups from tearing each other apart. Vance had broken that agreement, and now Derrick had the proof.
"We don't need to fight him," Derrick said. "We just need to show this to the right people." Evelyn nodded.
"There's a council meeting you can request. The Syndicate elders in Newark, the ones who oversee the corridor's shared infrastructure. If you present this evidence to them, they'll revoke Vance's access and strip his regional backing."
"I know exactly who to call." Derrick reached for the burner phone. "How soon can you have this organized into a presentation they'll understand?"
"Give me 4 hours."
Derrick made the call. Evelyn turned back to the screen and began building the case that would end Vance Cross's reign over the Northern Corridor. Outside, the mountains sat in cold silence, and the clouds pressed lower against the peaks. And somewhere far to the east, a man who had abandoned his bride on a frozen highway was about to learn the cost of every decision that had led him to this moment. Newark on a Wednesday afternoon looked like every other mid-Atlantic city trying to pretend it wasn't tired. Gray buildings under a gray sky, traffic grinding through intersections with the sluggish rhythm of a place that had stopped being in a hurry years ago. Derrick drove through the downtown grid in a rented SUV, a different vehicle from the sedan they'd used since Brooklyn. Dana had swapped it at a dealership in eastern Pennsylvania that morning, paying cash under a name that didn't exist. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat with a leather briefcase on her lap. Inside it was a tablet loaded with the organized evidence, charts, transaction maps, account summaries, and a timeline that traced Vance's skimming operation from its earliest entries 27 months ago to the most recent transactions recorded just days before the wedding. She'd spent the full 4 hours at the cabin condensing the raw data into something that could be understood by people who weren't forensic analysts.
Clean visuals, clear numbers, a story told in dollars and dates that left no room for interpretation.
"Tell me about these elders,"
Evelyn said, as Derrick turned onto a side street lined with brownstones.
5 of them. They've been running the corridor's shared infrastructure for the last 15 years. Think of them as a board of directors for a company that nobody admits exists. They don't control any single organization. They manage the neutral systems that all of us depend on. Trade routes, financial clearing channels, dispute resolution. Their authority comes from the fact that every major operation on the eastern seaboard agreed to let them hold that position.
"And they have the power to revoke Vance's access?"
They have the power to do more than that. If the council determines that a member has violated the shared agreements, they can strip that member's regional backing. That means every ally, every partner, every affiliated group that currently supports Vance's operation gets a directive to cut ties, immediately. No negotiations, no appeals.
Has that ever happened before?
Derrick parked the SUV in front of a brownstone with a dark green door. Once, about 8 years ago, a distributor in Virginia was caught redirecting shipments from the neutral corridors into his private channels. The council pulled his backing in a single afternoon. By the end of the week, his organization had collapsed. He couldn't move product, couldn't secure financing, couldn't even get a meeting with the people who'd been shaking his hand the month before.
"What happened to him?"
"He moved to Florida and opened a car wash. Last I heard, he's doing okay." Derrick killed the engine and looked at the brownstone. The windows on the upper floors were dark, but the ground-level lights were on behind heavy curtains. A man in a long coat stood near the entrance, hands clasped in front of him. Security, positioned to look like someone waiting for a taxi.
"One thing before we go in," Derrick said. "These men are old school. They don't like surprises, they don't like outsiders, and they definitely don't like being told they missed something happening under their watch. You're going to be presenting evidence that Vance has been stealing from the shared routes for over 2 years. That means they failed to catch it. They won't thank you for that."
"I'm not looking for thanks."
"I know, but let me handle the politics. You present the data. I'll manage the room." They walked to the green door. The man in the coat gave Derrick a slight nod and stepped aside. Inside, a narrow hallway led to a staircase descending to the basement level. The stairs opened into a room that had been designed for exactly this kind of meeting. A long oak table, 8 chairs, recessed lighting, and walls lined with soundproofing panels disguised as wood paneling. No windows, one entrance. 4 men were already seated at the table. The 5th arrived 2 minutes after Derrick and Evelyn took their places. His name was Solomon, the oldest of the group, late 70s, with white hair combed back from a lined forehead and hands that rested on the table with the stillness of someone who had learned decades ago that unnecessary movement was a form of weakness. "Derrick," Solomon said, "you called this meeting with some urgency. We're listening." Derrick kept it brief. He explained the situation in clean, direct terms: the wedding, the convoy, Evelyn's true identity, the micro-drive, the decryption. He laid out the timeline without editorializing, letting the facts do the work. When he finished, he gestured to Evelyn. "Ms. Marsh has the evidence. I'll let her walk you through it." Evelyn opened the briefcase, removed the tablet, and connected it to a display screen mounted on the far wall. The first image appeared, a chart showing the flow of funds through the corridor's neutral transaction channels over the past 27 months. "Gentlemen," she said, "what you're looking at is a complete record of every transaction that passed through the corridor's shared financial clearing system during this period. The blue lines represent legitimate traffic, funds moving between authorized parties at the agreed-upon rates. The red lines represent diversions." She tapped the screen. The red lines multiplied, branching off from the main channels like tributaries feeding into a separate river. Each red line is a transaction that was intercepted at the clearing level and rerouted through a series of shell companies controlled by Vance Cross. The amounts are small on a per-transaction basis, typically between 3 and 5%, but the volume of traffic through these channels is enormous. She moved to the next slide. A spreadsheet filled the screen, rows of account numbers and dollar amounts organized by date. Over 27 months, the total amount diverted from the shared routes into Vance's private accounts comes to just over $47 million. The room was quiet. Solomon's hands hadn't moved from the table, but his eyes had narrowed by a fraction. The man to his left, a broad-shouldered figure named Kaplan, who controlled the coastal logistics network, leaned forward in his chair. "You're telling us Vance has been skimming from the neutral lines," Kaplan said. "From our lines." "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And you have proof that this isn't fabricated, that these records came directly from his system?" Evelyn pulled up the metadata. "Every file on this drive carries a digital signature generated by Vance's own encryption protocol. These aren't copies or reconstructions. They're the original transaction records, extracted directly from his primary servers. The signatures can be independently verified against the clearing system's public ledger. If any of your technical people want to authenticate them, the process takes about 40 minutes. Solomon spoke without raising his voice. "That won't be necessary. I've seen Vance's encryption signatures before. The format is distinctive." He paused. 47 million. 47 million and change, Evelyn confirmed. Solomon looked at each of the other 4 men in turn. Something passed between them, a silent conversation conducted through glances and slight movements that Evelyn couldn't fully read, but Derrick understood perfectly. These men had been working together for 15 years. They had a shorthand that didn't require words. "We've been monitoring the corridor's clearing metrics for anomalies," Solomon said. "Our systems flagged minor discrepancies in the quarterly reports, but they fell within acceptable variance. We attributed them to rounding errors in the automated reconciliation process." "That's by design," Evelyn said. "Vance calibrated his skimming algorithm to stay within the noise floor of your monitoring systems. Each individual diversion was small enough to look like a rounding artifact. The pattern only becomes visible when you aggregate the data over the full 27-month period and cross-reference it against his private account records." Solomon sat back in his chair. His expression hadn't changed dramatically throughout the presentation, but something fundamental had shifted behind his eyes. Derrick recognized it. He'd seen it once before, 8 years ago, in this same room, when the Virginia distributor's case had been laid out on this same table. It was the look of a man who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment to announce it. "The council will convene a formal ruling within the hour," Solomon said. "Derrick, you and Ms. Marsh will remain here until we've reached our determination." Derrick nodded. He and Evelyn moved to chairs along the wall, while the 5 men spoke among themselves in low voices at the table. The conversation lasted 38 minutes. Evelyn counted every one of them. When Solomon turned back to face the room, his voice carried the weight of something final. "The council has reviewed the evidence presented by Ms. Marsh and finds it credible and sufficient. Effective immediately, Vance Cross's access to all shared corridor infrastructure is revoked. His regional backing is withdrawn. All affiliated organizations will be notified within the hour to sever operational ties with his network. Any party that continues to support his operations after this directive will be subject to the same sanctions." He looked at Derrick. "You brought this to us, so I'll extend a courtesy. Whatever you're planning to do with this evidence beyond this room, do it quickly. Vance will know about this ruling before sundown, and a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind." Derrick stood. "I appreciate the warning." Solomon's gaze shifted to Evelyn. "Ms. Marsh, you spent 8 months inside that man's life to pull this off. I won't ask what that cost you personally, but this council is in your debt." Evelyn met his eyes and gave a single nod. It was the only acknowledgement she needed. They climbed the stairs, walked through the hallway, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The afternoon air was cold and sharp, and the sky had darkened to the color of wet concrete. Derrick's phone was already buzzing, Marcus checking in, looking for an update. Evelyn stood beside the SUV, the briefcase at her side, and took a long breath. 27 months of Vance's theft exposed in less than 40 minutes. His allies would receive the council's directive within the hour. By tonight, his phone would stop ringing. By tomorrow, the people who had stood beside him would be calculating how fast they could distance themselves from his name. The financial walls were closing in. But Vance Cross was still out there, and Solomon's warning echoed in her mind as she climbed into the passenger seat. A man with nothing left to lose. That was the part that worried her. Baltimore's harbor smelled like diesel fuel and salt water. The commercial shipping yards stretched along the waterfront in a maze of stacked containers, loading cranes, and concrete lanes wide enough for the heavy trucks that moved cargo between the docks and the warehouses lining the perimeter. At dusk, the yard was winding down, the last shift crews finishing their loads, forklifts retreating to their charging stations, floodlights clicking on in sequence as the natural light bled out of the sky. Evelyn had chosen this location for a specific reason. The shipping yard's logistics center housed a commercial-grade satellite uplink used for tracking international cargo in real time. It was one of the few civilian systems on the East Coast with enough bandwidth to transmit the decrypted files simultaneously to multiple recipients without bottlenecking. She needed that speed. The files had to reach the regulatory oversight bodies, the independent auditing firms, and the financial monitoring networks all at once. A staggered transmission would give Vance's remaining tech people time to intercept and block the later uploads. Everything had to go out in a single burst. Derrick had arranged access through a contact who managed the yard's night operations, a man named Whelan who owed the Sterling Syndicate a favor from 3 years back and was smart enough to know that repaying it quietly was better than the alternative. Whelan had left the logistics center unlocked and pulled his security staff to the far end of the yard for an unscheduled equipment inspection that would conveniently last 2 hours. Dana dropped them at the service entrance on the south side of the yard and took the car to a position 3 blocks east, where she could monitor the main access road. Derrick and Evelyn moved through the container rows toward the logistics center.
A squat, concrete building with a flat roof and a cluster of satellite dishes mounted on a steel frame above the entrance.
Inside, the room was functional and charmless. Banks of monitors displayed container tracking data. A central console held the satellite uplink controls. Evelyn set up the server on a metal desk beside the console, connected it to the uplink, and began configuring the transmission parameters. "How long once you hit send?" Derrick asked. He stood near the window, scanning the yard through a gap in the blinds.
7 minutes for the full package. The files are compressed, but there's a lot of data. I'm sending to 11 recipients simultaneously.
11.
3 regulatory bodies, 4 independent auditing firms, 2 financial monitoring networks, and 2 investigative journalism outlets that specialize in corporate fraud. I've been building these contacts for years. They know the data is coming. They just don't know when.
Derrick checked his phone. Marcus had sent an update 20 minutes ago. Vance's organization was fracturing faster than expected.
The council's directive had gone out the previous evening, and within hours, 3 of Vance's largest partners had publicly severed ties. 2 more had gone silent, which in this world meant the same thing. His supply chain was collapsing, his financial channels were frozen, and the people who had once stood in his corner were now pretending they'd never heard his name. A desperate man on a shrinking island. Solomon's warning kept playing in Derrick's mind.
"I'm ready,"
Evelyn said. Her finger hovered over the enter key.
"Once this goes out, there's no pulling it back."
"Send it." She pressed the key. The screen filled with progress bars, 11 of them, each representing a separate upload stream. The satellite dishes on the roof hummed as the uplink powered to full capacity, pushing data skyward at a rate that made the building's fluorescent lights flicker slightly. 3 minutes in, Dana called. Her voice was tight. 3 vehicles just turned onto the harbor access road, moving fast, no headlights. Derrick moved to the opposite window. From here, he could see the main gate of the shipping yard, 300 yards away. The vehicles, dark SUVs, identical, rolled through the open gate without stopping and fanned out into the container rows. Doors opened. Men stepped out. 12, maybe 15. They moved with coordination, spreading into teams of 3, each team taking a different lane between the container stacks. Vance was here, or at least his people were.
"How did they find us?"
Evelyn asked, her eyes still locked on the progress bars. 41%. The uplink, a satellite transmission this powerful from a commercial yard at night, would show up on any decent signal monitoring system. Vance's tech people must have been scanning for exactly this kind of activity.
"I need 4 more minutes."
Derrick assessed the situation. The logistics center had 2 exits, the service entrance they'd used to enter and a loading dock on the north side. Vance's teams were approaching from the west and south, moving through the container rows in a pattern designed to converge on the building. They were organized, but they were operating in an environment they didn't control. Derrick did. He'd spent an hour with Whelan's operational manual that afternoon, studying the yard's automated systems. The container cranes operated on programmable tracks. The security barriers, heavy steel bollards designed to stop trucks, could be raised and lowered from the logistics center's console. The floodlight arrays were individually controllable. He sat down at the operations console and pulled up the yard management interface. His fingers moved across the controls with purpose. The first crane activated, a massive gantry unit on rails that ran the length of the eastern container row. It lurched into motion, swinging a 40-foot container laterally across the lane. The steel box dropped into position with a resonant boom that echoed across the yard, blocking the southern approach entirely. 2 of Vance's teams scrambled to reroute. Derrick raised a line of security bollards along the western lane, cutting off their alternate path. The bollards rose from the concrete like steel teeth, 3 feet high and spaced tightly enough that no vehicle could pass between them. Then he killed the floodlights on the south and west sections of the yard. Darkness swallowed those lanes completely. The only illumination left was in the immediate area around the logistics center and the northern loading dock, Derrick's chosen exit route.
67%,
Evelyn said.
Through the window, Derrick could see flashlights bobbing in the darkened container rows. Vance's teams were still moving, but slowly now, picking their way through an unfamiliar layout that had just been rearranged around them. The crane repositioned again, this time sliding a second container across an intersection that two teams had been converging on, forcing them to backtrack. Evelyn kept her eyes on the screen. 80%. 85%. The progress bars climbed with agonizing patience, while the satellite dishes overhead pushed data into the sky. "Movement on the north side," Dana reported through the phone. "One team made it around the perimeter. 3 men approaching the loading dock." Derrick activated the last set of security barriers, a row of bollards flanking the loading dock entrance. They rose just as the 3 men reached the concrete apron, forcing them to stop short. The bollards were waist-high, impossible to drive through, difficult to climb over quickly. It would buy minutes, and minutes were all they needed. 92%, Evelyn said. Derrick heard shouting from the yard. Someone was trying to override the crane controls from an external panel near the main gate. He locked the system with Whelan's administrative code and disabled remote access. The cranes stopped responding to anything except the console in front of him. 97! The shouting grew closer. Flashlight beams swept across the logistics center's windows. Someone pounded on the service entrance door, a heavy, rhythmic hammering that shook the frame. 99! The door's hinges groaned. Another impact. Done! Evelyn pulled the micro drive from the server and pocketed it. The screen displayed 11 confirmation messages. Every recipient had received the complete file package. The data was out. Distributed across 11 independent systems in different locations across the country. There was no taking it back, no intercepting it, no deleting it. The proof of Vance Cross's fraud was now in the hands of people whose entire purpose was to act on exactly this kind of evidence. "Loading dock, now," Derrick said. They moved fast. Through the back corridor of the logistics center, past the equipment storage room, and out the loading dock's side door, a personnel exit that opened onto a narrow alley between the building and the perimeter wall. The bollards Derrick had raised were holding the 3-man team on the other side of the dock, their attention focused on getting over the barriers rather than watching the side exit. Dana brought the car round to the perimeter gate on the east side of the yard. Derrick and Evelyn cleared the wall through a maintenance gap and reached the vehicle just as the first of Vance's men appeared on the loading dock behind them, too far away and too late to close the distance. The car pulled onto the harbor road and accelerated south toward the interstate. Evelyn leaned back in the seat, the micro drive clutched in her hand, her pulse still hammering from the sprint. She looked at Derrick in the dim light of the dashboard. "It's done," she said. Derrick watched the harbor lights recede in the mirror. Somewhere behind them, Vance Cross's men were standing in a shipping yard full of rearranged containers and locked machinery, realizing that everything they'd come to stop had already happened. "Almost," Derrick said. "We still need to see this through to the end." The Federal Plaza in downtown Baltimore occupied an entire city block, a wide expanse of concrete and stone anchored by a brutalist office tower that housed regional financial enforcement divisions. The building had the charm of a cinder block and the warmth of a tax audit. But on this particular morning, it was the most important piece of real estate on the eastern seaboard. Derrick parked the rented SUV on a side street 2 blocks from the plaza. The morning was cold and clear, the first blue sky they'd seen in days, as if the weather had decided to cooperate now that everything else was falling into place. Evelyn sat beside him with a coffee she'd bought from a cart near the harbor. She held it with both hands but hadn't taken a sip. Her attention was fixed on the plaza entrance, where a cluster of dark sedans with government plates had been accumulating since dawn. 11 recipients, Evelyn said. 3 regulatory bodies, 4 auditing firms, 2 monitoring networks, 2 journalism outlets. I sent those files 14 hours ago. That's fast, even for agencies that are motivated. Vance made it easy for them. His accounts were already flagged by the council's directive yesterday. The moment the regulatory bodies received your data, they had everything they needed to move.
Account numbers, routing codes, transaction histories, all verified against the corridor's public ledger. There's nothing to investigate. The evidence is the investigation.
Evelyn finally took a sip of her coffee. It was lukewarm, but she didn't seem to notice. I spent 8 months inside his life. 8 months of dinners, meetings, phone calls where I sat in the next room pretending to read a magazine while I memorized account numbers. 8 months of being someone I'm not, smiling at a man I was building a case against. She paused. There were moments when I almost forgot which version of me was real. Evelyn Vance, the fiancée, the trophy, the woman who laughed at his jokes and wore the dresses he picked out. She started to feel more solid than Evelyn Marsh. That scared me more than anything Vance ever did. Derrick looked at her. But you kept going. I kept going because every time I started to lose the thread, I'd pull up the numbers in my head. The 47 million, the shell companies, the people downstream who were being robbed without knowing it. The numbers were always real, even when everything else felt like fiction. Derrick's phone buzzed. Marcus from Newark. Federal teams are mobilizing at Vance's regional headquarters on Pratt Street. Asset freeze orders have been issued across all domestic accounts. It's happening. Derrick showed the message to Evelyn. She read it, set her coffee in the cup holder, and opened the car door. "I want to see it," she said. They walked to the plaza on foot, keeping to the opposite side of the street. The federal building's main entrance was flanked by agents in dark jackets, their postures carrying the particular blend of authority and boredom that came from standing outside in the cold, waiting for a signal. 3 news vans had already arrived, their satellite masts extended, camera operators setting up on the sidewalk with the practiced efficiency of people who filmed this kind of thing regularly. At 9:17 a.m., a convoy of 3 black SUVs turned onto the street from the east. They moved slowly, flanked by 2 unmarked sedans. The vehicles stopped in front of the plaza, and agents moved forward to open the doors. Vance Cross stepped out of the middle vehicle. He was shorter than Evelyn remembered, or maybe he'd just gotten smaller since the last time she'd seen him. His suit was wrinkled, the first time she'd ever seen him in anything less than perfectly pressed clothing. His hair, normally combed with architectural precision, was slightly disheveled. His hands were in front of him, wrists bound by steel cuffs that caught the morning sunlight and threw it back in brief, sharp flashes. He looked around the plaza with the expression of a man who was still calculating, still searching for an angle, still believing that somewhere in this situation there was a door he hadn't tried yet. His eyes swept the perimeter, the agents, the cameras, the growing crowd of onlookers, and for a brief moment they passed over the spot where Evelyn stood on the far sidewalk. He didn't recognize her. She was wearing a plain coat, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry except the pendant tucked beneath her collar. She looked nothing like the bride he'd left on a highway 10 days ago. She looked like a stranger in a crowd, which was exactly what she'd been the entire time he thought he knew her. The agents guided him toward the building entrance. Vance walked with the measured steps of someone who was trying to maintain dignity in a situation that had already stripped it away. He didn't stumble, didn't resist, didn't say a word to the cameras that were capturing every second. He just walked, one foot in front of the other, through the glass doors, and into the building where his financial empire would be formally disassembled. Evelyn watched until the doors closed behind him. Then she exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to carry 8 months of accumulated weight with it. "It's over," she said. Derrick stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, watching the plaza return to its normal rhythm as the agents cleared the entrance and the news crews began packing their equipment. "For him, yes," Derrick said. "His accounts are frozen, his allies are gone. The evidence you collected is now in the hands of people who will spend the next year turning it into formal charges. Vance Cross is finished." Evelyn turned away from the plaza and started walking back toward the car. Derrick fell into step beside her. "What about Carter?" she asked. "Marcus tracked him to a motel in Connecticut 3 days ago. He's been sitting there, waiting for a call from Vance that's never going to come."
Without Vance's protection, Carter has no leverage, no territory, and no friends. He'll disappear on his own. Men like that always do. They reached the SUV. Dana was leaning against the driver's door, arms folded, watching them approach with the relaxed posture of someone who already knew how the morning had played out. "Newark?" Dana asked. Derrick shook his head. "Washington, one more stop." Union Station in Washington, D.C. was built to make people feel small. The main hall soared overhead in a vaulted ceiling lined with gold leaf and hexagonal coffers supported by columns thick enough to hide behind. Voices echoed off the marble floors, blending into a constant low hum that sounded like the city itself was murmuring. Travelers moved through the space in every direction. Business people with rolling suitcases, families, couples walking arm in arm toward platforms they'd memorized years ago. Derrick arrived at 11:30, wearing a dark coat over a plain shirt. No entourage, no security detail. Dana was parked outside in the SUV, engine running, but he'd asked her to stay with the vehicle. This was a conversation he wanted to have without an audience. He found Evelyn near the central atrium, sitting on a wooden bench beneath the departures board. She had a small travel bag at her feet and a manila envelope in her lap. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders, and she was wearing the jacket they'd bought in the Poconos, the same one she'd worn through Philadelphia, through the cabin, through Baltimore. It looked comfortable on her now, lived in, like it had absorbed enough of the last 10 days to become part of her story. She saw him coming and stood up. "You're early," she said. "You're packed light." She glanced down at the travel bag. "I've been living out of borrowed clothes for 10 days. This is actually more than I started with." Derrick almost smiled. He gestured toward the bench, and they both sat down. The departures board above them clicked and shuffled, updating platform numbers and departure times with a mechanical rhythm that belonged to an older version of the world. "The council called this morning," Derrick said. "Solomon personally. Vance's entire network is being dismantled. The shared trade routes are being audited and restructured with new oversight protocols. Solomon mentioned that a significant portion of the recovered funds will be redistributed to the organizations that were affected by the skimming, including yours, including mine, which means the Sterling Syndicate comes out of this stronger than we went in. New alliances are already forming. 3 operations that used to work with Vance have reached out in the last 24 hours, looking to establish trade agreements." Evelyn nodded slowly. "So you won?" "We won. None of this happens without you, Evelyn. The drive, the decryption, the evidence. You spent 8 months building the case that took Vance down. I just provided the logistics." "You provided a lot more than logistics. You pulled me off a highway in a blizzard when you had every reason to leave me there. You could have used me as a bargaining chip. You could have handed me back to Vance and negotiated a truce that would have been worth millions to your operation. Instead, you drove me across 4 states, fought off your own man's betrayal, and helped me finish something I started alone." She looked at him directly. "Why?" Derrick considered the question. He could have given her the strategic answer, that Vance's downfall benefited the Sterling Syndicate, that the stolen funds recovery justified the risk, that eliminating a rival without a direct confrontation was the smartest possible outcome. All of that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. "Because when I found you on that highway," he said, "you were barefoot in the snow, wearing a torn wedding dress, and you told me you'd rather take your chances with the blizzard than get in a car with me. That told me something about who you are. You weren't a victim waiting to be rescued. You were someone in the middle of a plan that had gone sideways, and you were still standing. I respect that. I've always respected that." Evelyn held his gaze for a moment, then looked down at the manila envelope in her lap. She opened it and pulled out a thin stack of documents: a new driver's license, a passport, a social security card, and a bank statement showing a modest but functional account balance. All under a name that wasn't Evelyn Vance or Evelyn Marsh. "Your people do good work," she said, examining the passport photo. The best. These documents will hold up under any standard verification. New name, clean history, no connections to Vance, the corridor, or anything related to the last 3 years of your life. You can go anywhere. Start fresh.
Where did you set up the initial address?
Richmond. It's far enough from the corridor to be safe, close enough to DC that you'll have access to the kind of financial institutions and consulting firms where someone with your skills can build a legitimate career. There's an apartment already leased under your new name. First 6 months are covered.
Evelyn slid the documents back into the envelope and held it against her chest. You didn't have to do any of this.
I know.
The data is already out there. The case against Vance is built. I'm not useful to you anymore.
Derrick, there's no strategic reason to spend resources setting me up with a new identity and a funded apartment in Virginia. You're right, there's no strategic reason. The words hung between them, simple and clear. Evelyn looked at him, and something shifted in her expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight release of the guarded posture she'd carried since the night he found her on Route 95. For 10 days, she'd been operating in survival mode, calculating every interaction, measuring every word. In this moment, sitting on a bench in Union Station with a train to catch and a new life waiting at the other end of the track, she let the calculations stop.
Thank you, she said, for everything.
You earned it, every bit of it. The departures board clicked above them. A platform number appeared next to the 12:15 train to Richmond. Evelyn glanced up at it, then back at Derrick.
If I ever need to reach you, she said, is there a way?
Derrick reached into his coat pocket and produced a small card, plain white, no name, just a 10-digit number printed in black ink. This number will always work, day or night. If you ever need anything, help, resources, a favor, you call it. No questions asked. She took the card, studied it for a moment, and slipped it into the envelope with her documents.
I hope I never have to use it, she said.
So do I, but it's there if you do. Evelyn picked up her travel bag and slung it over her shoulder. She stood, and Derrick stood with her. They faced each other in the middle of the great hall, two people who had been strangers 10 days ago and were now connected by something that didn't have a clean label. Not friendship exactly, not obligation, not romance. Something quieter, something built on long drives through dark highways, shared silences in mountain cabins, and the particular kind of trust that forms when two people survive something difficult together.
Take care of yourself, Derrick Sterling, she said. Take care of yourself, whoever you are now.
She laughed, a real laugh, warm and brief, the first one he'd heard from her that wasn't filtered through caution or calculation. Then she turned and walked toward the platform, her bag over one shoulder, the envelope tucked under her arm, her steps steady and unhurried. Derrick watched her cross the hall. She didn't look back. He hadn't expected her to. Evelyn Marsh, or whatever her name was now, was the kind of person who moved forward. It was the thing he'd recognized in her from the very beginning, standing on that frozen highway in a ruined wedding dress, choosing the storm over surrender. She reached the platform entrance and disappeared into the crowd of passengers boarding the Richmond train. Derrick stood there for another minute, hands in his pockets, listening to the echoes of the station. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, where Dana was waiting, with the engine running and the long road back to New York stretched out ahead of him. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Boss, the coastal operators just confirmed the new trade agreement. We're looking at a 30% increase in corridor access by end of month. Solomon wants a formal meeting next week to discuss restructuring the oversight committee, and 3 of Vance's former lieutenants are asking for sit-downs. Derrick pushed through the station doors and stepped into the midday sun. The air was cold but clean, and the city hummed around him with the steady energy of a place that never stopped moving. Schedule the meeting with Solomon for Thursday, he said. The lieutenants can wait. I want background checks on all 3 before I agree to sit in a room with them.
Copy that. Heading back to Newark?
Derrick looked south, toward the tracks where a train was pulling away from the station, gathering speed, carrying a woman with a new name toward a life that nobody from her old world would ever be able to find. "Yeah," he said. "I'm heading back." He climbed into the SUV, and Dana pulled away from the curb. The station grew smaller in the side mirror, and then it was gone, replaced by the highway and the road north and the work that was already waiting for him. The Sterling syndicate was stronger than it had been 10 days ago. The corridor was stable. A dangerous man was behind locked doors, with no allies and no money.
And somewhere on a train heading south, a woman who had pulled off one of the most audacious intelligence operations in the corridor's history was watching the countryside roll past her window, starting over. Derrick leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. For the first time in 10 days, his mind was quiet. The game wasn't over. It never was in his world. But this round was finished, and he'd played it well. The SUV merged onto the interstate, heading north, and the miles began to add up behind them.